Bonjour and benvenue. Hello and welcome to the Wicked Webs We Weave podcast. I am your host, Ryan Mckern. Venture with me into the past of the Midwest of the United States. The Worlds Fair Chicago, entitled Worlds Columbian Exposition, was held in Chicago, Illinois in 1893 to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival to the New World in 1492. The fairgrounds would be the setting, given the name the White City, based on its neoclassical architecture and paint job, symmetry, and material used to cover the buildings. From May until October of 1893, this massive World's Fair covered 690 acres and hosted more than 27 million people. Attractions included the original Ferris wheel and a young music promoter, Bloom coined the phrase, the Midway. To the fair's carnival side of the games and the Midway sideshow exhibits, the popular dancer, Little Egypt, introduced Westerners to the belly dance. The first moving walkway, or the travelator as it was dubbed, was introduced. The 1893 World's Fair Chicago also saw the world debut of Pabst Blue Ribbon beer, Cracker Jack candy, Juicy Fruit gum, just among a few products, as well as the locomotive acquisition, artillery, casinos, and world-famous architecture structures and designs broke headlines at the World's Fair. The influx of tourism would set the stage for a much more dark and precise events in the world's history, into the realms of shadows and minds of only nightmares, right in the heart of Chicago. Dubbed H.H. Holmes Murder Castle by the press, this was a methodically designed hotel of horrors that would be the host of one of America's first serial killers, H.H. Holmes. With a floor plan that included secret passageways, cremation furnaces, soundproofing, gas chambers, chutes capable of fitting bodies, stoves that would burn bones. The American Ripper killings are some of the most bizarre and intriguing to date. This is a disclaimer, as this podcast will recall some of these events from a journalistic point of view and study. It is to no way glamorize, sensationalize the events that took place. Quote, I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. End quote. H.H. Holmes. We go in to explore the fact and many fiction in the case regarding H.H. Holmes. And we go inside the murder castle of the 1890s Chicago. 100 rooms of H.H. Holmes' house were allegedly filled with trapdoors, gas chambers, staircases to nowhere, stoves, a human-sized stove, vaults. If you were staying at the World's Fair Hotel, more commonly known as the H.H. Holmes Hotel, you might run up a flight of stairs and find that it led to nowhere. You'd open doors and only see solid brick. You'd enter a bedroom and suddenly smell gas seeping in. You'd try to run, only to realize you were locked in. Even if you could open the door, you would probably couldn't find your way out of the house. And before long, you'd meet your gruesome end. Or at least that's how the story of the H.H. Holmes house goes. As one of America's first known serial killers, H.H. Holmes became infamous not only for his crimes, but also for his legendary murder hotel in Chicago. Sometimes called a murder castle, or a murder mansion, this mysterious building was initially believed to be a normal hotel, and just a way for Holmes to make money during the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. But a police investigation later revealed something far more sinister. While it remains unknown how many people Holmes murdered in the House of Horrors, he once boasted of killing 27 people. However, some estimates claim the actual number may have been as low as 9 or as high as 200. In recent years, some historians have cast doubt on whether the H.H. Holmes house was really a murder castle at all. While there's no doubt that Holmes was a serial killer, experts have suggested that some of the most sordid details of his home, like the homemade gas chamber and trapdoors, may have been mere products of yellow journalism. But at the end of the day, only the man himself ever knew of all the secrets of the H.H. Holmes Hotel and how many people died within its walls. H.H. Holmes first came to Chicago in 1886, leaving behind more than one previous life. He was born Herman Webster Muggett. Previous scandals gave him good reason to change his name. Like in college, when he worked in the anatomy lab and mutilated cadavers to defraud life insurance companies, or when he was the last person to have been seen with a missing little boy in New York, or when he worked as a pharmacist in Philadelphia and a customer died after taking his pills. After all these incidents, Muggett simply skipped town and eventually changed his name to Henry Howard Holmes. Soon after his arrival in the Wind City, Holmes got a job in a drugstore on 63rd Street, using his knowledge of medicine and his charming personality to secure the position. Holmes was fashionable, bright, and likable. In fact, he was so likable that at one point in his life he was married to 3 unknowing women at once. In 1887, he bought an empty lot across the street from the store where he had worked and began construction on a 3-story building, which he said would be used for apartments and shops. The structure was ugly and large, containing more than 100 rooms and stretching for an entire block. But Chicago was a city on the rise, and new construction was going up all over the part of the American Midwest. After all, Chicago was perfectly situated on the shores of Lake Michigan as a central hub for the expansive railroad networks that crisscrossed the nation, all extending like spokes in a wheel from the city. Little did residents know that a house of horrors was about to emerge in that very same place. For his mansion, H.H. Holmes planned for the first floor to contain an entire block of storefronts that he would be able to rent out for the food of new businesses opening up in the city. The third floor would contain apartments for new residents looking to make it big in the Windy City. Eerily, some of those unsuspecting residents may have eventually become Holmes' victims. Those victims got to see the second floor, one that was allegedly full of asphyxiation chambers, mazes, and hidden stairs, and the especially unlucky victims made it down to the basement, which hid the elaborate horrors for the H.H. Holmes house, is now famous. Throughout the building's construction, Holmes apparently switched builders and architects frequently, so that no one involved was able to realize the gruesome goal of the odd parts. This is also due to Holmes often scamming and skipping out on many contracting bills for which he would never pay. The house was completed in 1892, and by 1894, police would be exploring its winding passages while Holmes sat behind bars. At first, authorities were confused by what they found. There were hinged walls and false partitions, Some rooms had 5 doors, and others had none. Secret, airless chambers were found underneath floorboards, and iron plate-lined walls appeared to stifle all around. As for Holmes' own apartment, it had a trapdoor in the bathroom, which opened to reveal a staircase that led to a windowless cubicle. In the cubicle, there was allegedly a large chute that tunneled through to the basement. This was believed to be used to dispose of the dead bodies within the hotel. One notable room was lined with gas fixtures. Here Holmes would apparently seal his victims in, flip a switch in an adjacent room, and wait for the horror to unfold. Another chute was found nearby. It is also said this is speculation and was not used for murder, and that Holmes also used this gas for not only evading bills, but also other schemes within the hotel. All the doors and some of the steps were connected to an intricate alarm system. Whenever someone stepped into the hall or headed downstairs, a buzzer sounded in Holmes' bedroom. It should be noted that these descriptions have been met with some skepticism by historians, especially in recent years, and so it's worth keeping in mind that at least some of the designs may have been exaggerated or even invented by the newspapers of the era, for which many journalists would climb and rush to get the newest piece of H.H. Holmes journalism and news, any kind of tidbit for the story to print, as when it was found out by the public, this was just a big media circus. Uncovering the H.H. Holmes Murder Hotel. The first clue about the bizarre floor plan's true purpose came to the cops in a pile of bones. Most of the bones were from animals, but some of them were human. They were so small that they almost certainly belonged to a child, one who was no more than 6 or 7 years old. And when the authorities descended into the cellar, the scope of the building's hidden horrors was finally revealed. Beside a blood-soaked operating table, they found a woman's clothes. Another surgical surface was nearby, along with a crematory, an array of medical tools, a bizarre torture device, and shells of disintegrating acids. Holmes' fascination with dead bodies had apparently lasted long past college, as his surgical skills. After dropping his victims down through the chutes, he reportedly dissected them, cleaned them, and then sold the organs or skeletons to medical institutions or on the black market. How an influx of transient workers provided fresh boarders. Though the mansion didn't look inviting in the least, it's likely that any of the victims were dragged into its depths they entered on their own violation, likely enchanted by the owner's flattery and apparent affluence. In some cases, may have been his employees. During his 2 short years in the castle, Holmes hired more than 150 women to work as stenographers. A few of them were known to be his mistresses as well. Holmes sometimes photographed his favorites. They were young, beautiful, and trusting of this gentleman in the big and unfamiliar city of Chicago. As a city on the rise that was well connected thanks to the railway hub, Chicago undoubtedly had a fresh flow of people coming in and out of Holmes' mansion. But despite the well-connected women who went missing under his employment, suspicions of murder weren't what led to Holmes' demise. People come and go all the time in a big city, often without notice, and before the age of advanced technology, it was especially hard to trace them. So the disappearance of the young women working under Holmes could have always been excused as them simply moving on or heading back home. Ultimately, theft and poorly planned financial schemes were led to the arrest of Holmes in Boston on November 17, 1894. After decades of criminal activity, the scale and complexity of which really need a book to fully grasp, H. Holmes was finally behind bars. While he was in jail, connections between him and at least one murder were revealed, and a pile of financial charges were obscured by more sinister accusations that emerged. When all was said and done, Holmes officially linked to 9 murders total. Though he boasted of committing at least 27 murders, he gave 3 different confessions and imprisonment, all with contradicting numbers. The true amount of victims was impossible to corroborate because the home was especially equipped for Holmes to disintegrate leftover body parts in acid baths or burn them in a human-sized stove. In one pile of the ashes, investigators found a small gold chain from a woman's shoe. As recounted in Eric Larson's book, The Devil in the White City, H. Holmes began his murder spree at a moment in history when an unprecedented throng of unknown, unaccompanied strangers were flooding the streets of Chicago, looking for temporary housing. The 1893 Chicago World's Fair was one of the most attended cultural events of the era, with millions of people participating in the historic celebration. Noting the thousands of people who went missing during the World's Fair, some papers suggested the actual count of Holmes' victims may have numbered in the hundreds. For the most part, Holmes represented himself at the trial, displaying classic grace and a remarkable familiarity with the law. According to one paper of the time, this may be due in fact to the insurance schemes and elixir schemes he would also partake in during the time at the castle. He would color water with a blue dye and sell it as an elixir. However, the charm wasn't enough for the jurors, and he was unanimously sentenced to death by hanging. The jury came to the decision within 2 hours. Very familiar with what could be done to a person's corpse after death, Holmes asked if his body could be encased in cement within his coffin. Shortly before his death in 1896, H. Holmes suggested that he was turning into the devil. Even his face, he said, was taking on a demonic look. His execution was an agonizing affair. When the floor was dropped beneath him, his neck didn't snap like it was supposed to. He lay twitching for about 20 minutes before he was pronounced dead. Strange deaths in the aftermath of the H. Holmes Hotel being uncovered. Later, strange fates befell the people connected to the case of the H. Holmes Hotel. The man who had initially tipped off the police to H. Holmes' illegal dealings was shot by a Chicago police officer. The warden of the prison where Holmes had been held killed himself. The office of the district attorney, who argued the famous case, caught on fire. And Patrick Quinlan, the former caretaker of the castle, who, after Holmes, knew the most about the haunted building, died by suicide in 1914. As for the murder castle itself, it is no longer standing today. In 1895, the mansion was gutted by a fire, which may have been started by 2 men who were entering the building at night. The remaining structure was torn down in 1838. and today the H.H. Holmes house is the site of an unassuming post office. In the end, H.H. Holmes would only be convicted of one murder within the 5-day trial. Holmes also wrote his own biography while incarcerated. After the trial, he tried to recall the autobiography, but the request was denied by the publishers, who then owned the rights to his book. They also tried to appeal his case, as he tried for a not guilty verdict, but the appeal was denied. Holmes' last meal was toast, eggs, coffee. And his words before being hung were as follows: "Take your time, old man. Don't bungle it." A relative of H.H. Holmes in 2017 had the body exhumed from his grave in Philadelphia. It was believed by the relative that Holmes did not die at a hanging, and that he was possibly responsible for the Jack the Ripper killings. The body was exhumed, and the decay was of unusual circumstance. The body did not decay completely because of the cement that was encased inside the coffin at the request of Holmes, and possibly this is also done to avoid grave robbers or tampering with the coffin. After a test was done, though, it is stated that the body inside the coffin was Holmes, and he did die at execution on May 7th, 1896. Facts and fiction almost blur together in some of this story. As I said previously, the newspapers would often exaggerate, fabricate stories just to get print, as all the papers were clamoring for the next big scoop. Police did not find any evidence of a murder within the castle, however. The castle itself was set on fire. The police eventually, on August 27, 1895, did search the Indiana home of Howard Petson, Holmes' previous co-worker. Some boys broke in in the night in the barn and found bones of a young boy. Holmes' biography that he wrote offered insight into his childhood, lore, life, and failed business ventures, where he displayed many of his often schemes. Holmes would often take out loans in other people's names, sign his mother's name and his previous wives. He would avoid paying and skip out on bills completely. This also led to him changing his names. Holmes had 2 children with 2 wives. What's even more interesting in this, we will never know. The complete details to this story can only be speculation from the fabrications of the newspaper. Holmes' confessions to 27 murders, despite some of the people that he confessed to murdering were actually still alive. It's shrouded in mystery. I would like to thank the following information: Smithsonian.com, AllThatIsInteresting.com, Devil in the White City, novel, Murder Castle, 2005 film, H.H. Holmes self-written biography, and American Ripper television series in 2017. These all contributed greatly to my research for this podcast. And thank you once again for joining me on the wicked webs we weave. Please subscribe and join us weekly for haunted history, true crime, all things horror. Once again, I am your host, Ryan Mckern. And until next time, au revoir.